Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 3 of the Courage to Identify podcast with me, your host, Sharon Angel. This week, we're going to talk about specifically celebrating our wins. What does it look like to celebrate these wins? And is there a place in our life or a thought in our head which does not allow us from celebrating these wins? For me growing up, I felt like I had so many things or so many projects that I had my hand at. And even in my personal life, I feel like I did not celebrate my wins, whether it was small or whether it was big, because there was always this pressure to succeed, always this pressure to do well, and always this pressure to show up as a young girl, as a South Asian woman, as, someone who wears multiple caps. There's always this pressure to go to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And as I've grown up and as I've gone through different phases of life, I've realized that not celebrating these small wins were just because life was so competitive and there were so much pressures in my life that I always had to show up and always had to perform, in a sense, to be able to show people that I am doing the work, that I am showing up in my academics, I am emotionally present, I am mentally present, and I'm giving myself, whether to my friends, to my family, to my closest circle, to people around me. So is this something that you also can relate to, whether as women or as men or just as South Asians or as humans? Do you think there is pressure in your life to always keep doing something, always be involved in something, that you don't have the mental capacity or the time to stop and celebrate the wins in your life? If you are not able to celebrate the wins in your life by maybe just writing down that it was a win for you, by going to an event, going to dinner, telling your friends and family that it was a win for you. If you're not able to do that, where is this coming from? And most importantly, is it necessary to celebrate the wins in our life? When we don't celebrate it, what happens? And when we do celebrate it, what happens? Today, I want to discuss this topic and see how does it affect us and what can we do to be better and find our identity. So today we're here with a mental health expert in Los Angeles, California. We have Ektha Agarwal with us. Hi, Ektha. Welcome to my show.
Hi, it's such an honor to be here. I'm very excited about today's conversation with you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Before we get into the conversation, I would like you to introduce yourself to my audience, just what you do. Would you share a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. As Sharon mentioned, I am a mental health specialist, a licensed clinical social worker out here in Los Angeles. I'm the CEO and founder of Shakti Therapy and Healing Services, which is a holistic-based group practice that really lifts and honors the voices of our people of color community. And so we love to use a mind, body, spirit approach, which we'll get into today, on how to reach that mental wellness and how to even understand what that means for each and every one of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ektha. So I'm just going to dive into the conversation. I had introed my audience to ask about, celebrating the little wins. Is this something that is specific to South Asian women? Why do we not celebrate the wins? Like, where is this coming from?
So it is a beautiful, rippling, vibrant space that we have when we celebrate nature. Think about Holi, Baisakhi, all these events. Again, a lot of color, a lot of celebration. And even big milestones, I think graduation, when a parent gets to see their child walk and accomplish this dream as a doctor, as an engineer, whatever it may be. It's a really proud moment for that parent. The challenge and the missing piece here is we forget to celebrate the small wins. And the small wins is where our day-to-day counts. It's the little accomplishments. For some of us, it can be getting up on a rainy day and showing up at work when it's so cold and you don't want to be there. That to me is such a celebration because it took that discipline, it took that effort and that commitment. Another small win is paying off your student loans. So many of us are not talking about it. And as a woman who's made it and has been able to pay for her own education, has been able to get herself out of educational debt, that's a small win. And in so many aspects, should be a really big win, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us don't celebrate the small win because it's not the 100%. Getting that 98% on a test, wow, let's celebrate that. But it's not 100%.
And
right?
Is that all coming from this question that our parents or elders ask, where is that 2%? So what does that mean are we trying to fight to get some approval or validation? Where is that coming from?
Yeah, I would say it's really this perfectionist mentality, which nicely feeds into that idea of the model minority myth. So not only do we have expectations of ourselves to be perfect, our families may be putting that expectation on ourselves to be perfect, but then we also have now society saying, oh, you're South Asian, you're Asian American. This is the standard we expect from you just by the way that you look, just by the way that you've grown up, let alone education hasn't been taken into account. Mental wellness and circumstance hasn't been taken into account. Language hasn't been taken into account. There are just so many layers. And what ends up happening is because there's these expectations of perfection on us, we end up not only failing other people, failing in quotations, but we also end up failing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads to gaslighting ourselves, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So can you expand on that? What is gaslighting? How do we do it to ourselves?
Absolutely. So gaslighting is really this idea where we have such high standards for ourselves. And when we don't meet those high standards, then what we end up doing is invalidating our own feelings and our own thoughts and our experiences. It's as if it wasn't enough. So going back to that 98%, you didn't hit 100. So it's not worth celebrating. It's not worth acknowledging. And that can be really hard on our self-esteem, on our confidence, on the way we view ourselves and present ourselves to the world. It can lead to things like second guessing yourself.
Right.
So I didn't get that 100%.
Am I
really?
worth it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Am I worth it? Do I know what I'm talking about? Imposter syndrome in the workspace.
So is this feeling of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough coming from culture or family? Is there some generational fixing that we need to do, kind of like realignment that we need to do?
I think it's pretty layered and probably a combination of so many things. If we just look at the Asian American culture, the South Asian culture, it's very strict. There's a huge emphasis on achievement and success. And the big celebrations are tied to those achievements and success.
Right.
Graduated college, you went to med school, you got married, you had a baby. And then what? And then what do we celebrate when we've made those big trajectories in our lives?
Right.
And so I do think culture plays a really big role. And I would say another layer is the immigration process. So many of our families have struggled in the motherland and have left to come to this new space where there's opportunities for their children. And in that opportunity, that pursuit to opportunity, they went through struggle. So their expectation is even higher. We've done all this for you and you brought home a 98%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's now guilt, shame, and loads of pressure that are tied to this emphasis of success and achievement coming from our culture. So we can already start to see now, yes, culture is a factor. Family experience, such as immigration, is a factor. And another one I mentioned is the model minority myth. Society putting that expectation, that's now also a factor. So they just begin to now stack on top of each other. And if your body is stacked with emotions of pressure and pressure and pressure and pressure, at some point it's going to explode. It's going to lead to things like anxiety and depression and gaslighting yourself and feeling worthless, feeling like you're not enough no matter how much you give. Even if you're giving 100%, it's not enough.
So how do we break this? Because it seems like there's layers upon layers upon layers, and this accumulates from ever since we're born to maybe we're in our 20s and 30s. And when we move to different countries or when we pick different careers, when we go through different stages in life, it just seems like this trauma, if I can say that, builds up. So how do we escape this? And what is your concept of mental health?
That is such a great question. I think we are all in pursuit of that answer. How do we escape this trauma? Or how do we, I would say, manage this trauma?
Mm-hmm.
If we think about escaping it, then the thought comes up, are we avoiding it? Are we hiding from it? Are we not addressing it?
Right.
And so when I think about managing the trauma, managing these expectations, this intergenerational trauma that's passed down. Because I promise you, if you're coming from a space of culture, you're not the first one to experience this. I bet you your parents have, and so forth. The first thing I would say is awareness. It's understanding that you don't have to carry this burden on your own. It's not yours alone. It is a shared cultural community challenge. When we begin to see that this big, giant mountain of a trauma then begins to dissipate amongst everyone, and there's this shared effort, shared compassion that begins to form. And that very idea of, I don't have to do this alone, can feel so deeply powerful. I think about the ego, the default mode network, and the default mode network's the part of our brain that tells us, you're not enough. You can't do this. You've never been able to do this. It's the limiting beliefs that show up when things are silent. You're bored, you're watching TV, and it's like, oh, did you turn on the dishwasher? Of course you did not. And it has a positive role. However, based on evolutionary psychology, we have 20 negative thoughts to one positive thought. So when you ask me, how do we begin to manage that? It's starting to shift those 20 to one negative thoughts. Every time you have that, I'm not worthy, turning that statement just around and saying, I am worthy. And of course, that default mode network's ready to respond. No, you're not. Who said you're worthy? How do you know you're worthy? So that conversation that you get to have with yourself continues. Well, I said I'm worthy. 98% is worthy.
Yeah, because we wire our brains to say negative things or to believe in the negative things, to believe in the negative voices. So even when we tell ourselves, no, you are worthy, you have value, it becomes so difficult to believe those words. And our default is to go back to operating from those negative voices. How important would you say mental health is in the South Asian community, especially Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankans? We all have this negative connotation of mental health to almost demonize mental health, or if we receive mental health help, it's as though we have a problem, we have an issue, and in extreme situations also ostracized and outcast from society. So is mental health necessary? How do we approach it?
That question in and of itself makes me really sad because it highlights the stigma that's around the concept of mental wellness. The short answer is mental health is absolutely necessary. It's what takes us from surviving to thriving. And the partner sister concept to mental health is physical health. If we had our shoulder broken or we had a headache and a migraine that didn't go away, we wouldn't ignore it. We sure wouldn't call someone crazy if they went to a doctor to get that checked and healed and managed. And so a lot of times I think about, where did this idea of going to see a professional, whether that's a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a, a healer, whatever that may be for you, where did going to see that become crazy? In the South Asian community, I think it's further stigmatized because of this need to be perfect. We're always happy. We are always put together. We're always calm, especially in public, because log kya kahenge? What will people say if you cry, if you admit failure, if you show any type of pain? What kind of shame will that bring on the family, on you, if you admit that? So with that conditioning, we don't give permission to people to show up as they are, to show up in their authentic sense. We don't even give the opportunity to support people. We shut those doors so quickly. And, the sad part of all of this is we're all struggling. I come from a family where my parents are separated. And when I was dating, I was telling my dad about this guy, and I was really excited about him. My dad asked about his family. I'm like, yeah, his parents are divorced and this and that. And he's like, we can't look at that. His parents are divorced. What kind of family are you marrying into, Ektha? And it made me pause and smile for a second. My dad is so loving and he's trying to protect me. And the irony of all of this is we're coming from a separated family as well. What would his family think if they judged us like that? And it's interesting. We are so quick to judge others, and yet we don't look and turn that mirror back at ourselves and look at ourselves.
Powerful.
So when we get right,
Powerful.
the mental health is so important, and it's something we get to really look and turn the mirror first at ourselves before at others.
Introspect. You get to see yourself first before you look at others or hear others or want validation from the outside. Are you telling yourself that you are worthy, you are valuable, you have the strength, you have the confidence? And if there's anything that you need to fix or heal from, having the courage to go on that journey and take that step, the first step toward healing, the first step toward recognizing that this is happening to me, and equipping yourself with the tools in order to kind of detach yourself from the negative voices and reinforce positivity. So another thing I wanted to ask is the savior mentality. Do we as women have this savior mentality that we overextend ourselves to give, to provide, even if it means sacrificing self and putting ourselves down? Is this something that you see? And if women are like that, how do they recognize it and how do they get out of it if needed?
Yeah, I would say the savior complex is very, very strong amongst women in the Asian American communities, and especially in the South Asian American communities. This idea that we can save or rescue other people, and it could be an individual or it could be a group, but we can save and rescue them from their problems, from their challenges, with or without their consent. And in hindsight, what a beautiful, beautiful experience to be able to save someone, to show up as a heroine, and to be able to make them feel better. On the surface, that's great. But if we unpack it a little bit, there's so many layers. There's that layer of guilt. I have to do this because there is an expectation. I think about historically, the concept of sati comes to mind. And sati was this idea where when your partner passed away, you would sacrifice yourself. And during the burial, you would be burned along with your husband. So that, again, that savior complex of I have got to do this for my husband, so our hearts are in harmony and we move into the afterlife together, sacrificing the whole life for someone else. And so there's that sense of depression, anxiety, and guilt because sometimes that savior complex is an expectation. It's not even something you believe in. And I think Sati is a really great example of it being an expectation back in the day versus your own personal belief.
And I think it also is like you said, you give so much of yourself that you don't allow space for the other person, whether it's your children or whether it's your spouse or your in-laws or your parents, to grow and for them to work on themselves, right? Do you see that? Is that a
Yeah.
reflection of savior mentality?
100%. The second point is you rob someone from building their resilience. You rob someone from accomplishing a challenge on their own and feeling victorious from that because you're so quick to save for them. And when we're kids and your child falls, we allow them to get up on their own because that's where they learn that they can do it. They can walk. We're not so quick to go and pick them up, even though that might be your instinct. And then you want to be, wait, I need to let my child do that. And so that same concept can be applied with the savior complex. When we allow people to go through their own challenges and their own problems, when we allow family members to do that, we teach them resilience. We ignite that gene, actually. We ignite the gene of resilience. We teach them that they can do this. Then voice of, I can't do it, shifts when they accomplish it. I can't do it. Now there's an example too.
Beautiful.
And I would say like the last piece to that is you're also impacting confidence and self-esteem right there in that moment when you step back from your own savior complex and you allow someone to take the lead for their own life.
Beautiful. Wonderfully said. I love how you kind of break down the layers, break down these walls, and then help us think through how can you do it. And I think the biggest thing of all of this is just realizing that we might need help. We might need to go on this healing journey. And it's okay to ask for help, to want the help, and to grow from the past trauma or shame or guilt, or even the generational biases that we in our culture, in our South Asian culture, have.
So much of what we talk about is the intergenerational trauma that's passed down. And that's so important because we're breaking patterns when we're creating awareness. We can then start to make change. And I also want to invite a shift in this conversation. Why don't we talk about the duality, the intergenerational wisdoms our ancestors are passing down? That's also within us.
When you talk about duality, what does that mean?
That's a great question. So duality is this idea that there's a dark and light side to everything. Even when we think about the word love, so much of us associate the word love with happiness and joy and connection and partnership. And the dark side of love is there could be jealousy, there could be control, there could be domestic violence. And so everything in life has a dark side. I think a fun one is magic. We think of magic as play and joyful and kids' parties. But the dark side of magic is trickery. It's mischievousness. It's deceiving. So look at things and it's wholesome. And looking at it and it's wholesome, looking at the dark side and the light side of something and finding balance between the two.
Great. That's what I always say to my audience. There's good versus bad. There's right versus wrong. There's ethical versus moral. There's left versus right. And who you are as a person, what your identity is choosing those core beliefs and choosing, where you stand between that. And really, that's where you solidify who you are as a person. So absolutely generational wisdom and passing it down, like being vocal about what you have learned and passing it down to the next generation or even your siblings, people who are in the same, ages you are. That is very important. Thank you for really opening up our minds to that. But finally, I just wanted to ask about heroic feminism. When we talk about feminism, it almost has this negative connotation today to say that, oh, when we talk about feminism, it's only about women's rights. And this, again, it's like 60s, what happened in the 60s, what women stood for, where people stood for. Obviously, that's understandable. But feminism, by definition, is striving for equality for the man's rights and the woman's rights. And we're fighting for both the man and the woman to be on a same platform, for people to be humans to be on the same platform. But in these days, because of globalization or career advancement or technology, it's come to a place where women have become so aggressive, tapping into their masculine energy, that men are threatened, or even other women are threatened not to come near them. So, can you talk about heroic feminism a little bit more? And is a contrast to that victim mindset? I'm going to let you kind of guide this conversation, but it's something that I'm reading about, something that I'm hearing about. I think it would be great if we talked about this.
Absolutely. I think this is a journey almost every woman will probably go through. And let me start by just defining masculine and feminine. Masculine energy is this desire to protect and provide. So it also includes control, aggression. Feminine energy is this desire to radiate, to expand, to nurture. And that can also include over emotion. Everyone has both energies. One just tends to be stronger in each person. Usually women tend to have a stronger feminine sense, and usually men tend to have a stronger masculine sense. So much of women have been about standing up for their beliefs, standing up for their rights. And this desire of being feminine has just been tested so many times. When we are feminine and the masculine isn't providing and protecting, then what happens? You get taken advantage of. And so there's this feminine rage that's developed where now we've calibrated completely on the other side of being masculine. I'm in control. I have rights. I'm going to stand up for myself. And it makes sense if we look at the evolution of history and how this has happened. And the journey that we get to move forward to is going back into that medium space where we get to feel safe, being in our feminine, knowing that our masculine counterparts are providing and protecting. So it takes both people to be able to create this safe, stable type of interaction and way of being. The heroic feminism really developed from this desire to want to be in control, to want to stand up for yourself, to want to have a voice. So it makes sense. And I think you put this really well. Sometimes in that heroic feminism, when it's over voiced, we can show up as aggressive, right? It's basic boundaries of no, but there's no follow-up. It's dismissing people. It's pushing other women down so you can thrive.
Oh,
And what I love is this outlook. Every woman's on your team. How would your life change if you actually believed that every single woman you met, the person that's crying right there, the frantic mom who's trying to put her kids in the car, the speaker on stage, what if every woman was on your team? How would you show up differently? How would they show up differently in your eyes? And that is the redefinition of a heroic feminist. And, when we play that victim mindset, we believe we're on our own. We believe we're competing against men. We believe we're competing against women. And I'll ask you this question. What do you think is the number one similarity between being a heroine and a victim?
the gender?
That's a good one. I didn't think about that. The gender is what? Yeah. But both heroines and victims fall.
Mm.
We all fail. The difference is a heroine says, I'm going to get back up. I'm going to rise. And I purposely used the word rise. So when you ask, how can we move from that victim mindset into that healthy, heroic, feminine mindset? It's through the concept of rise. R is recognizing that you have fallen, recognizing that your limiting beliefs have gotten in the way, recognizing that the voice is causing you to be aggressive and to put other women down, to put men down. It's creating that sense of awareness. I, or rise, is intentionality. And intentionality is taking that moment to pause and respond to yourself with intention. Most of the times when we're trying to make the shift from victim to heroine, it's an internal process. And so the quality of the questions you ask yourself is the quality of the life you're going to have.
Mm.
If I asked you, are you going to keep falling or get up? Well, your answer is either I'm going to fall or I'm going to get up. But as soon as I shift that question and ask, how are you going to get up? You don't have an option to stay down. And the answer you're going to give me is going to be very different. And your brain that comes in and says, let's make this happen. There's a hormone that's excreted that shifts the process. So ask quality questions by being intentional. S, seek support. As I mentioned, every woman is on your team. Reach out to your support network. That could be professionals like doctors, therapists, psychologists. We're all here. We want to support you. There's so many South Asian professionals who understand the culture. And we understand that support varies from culture to culture. Reach out to friends you trust, family members you feel safe with. Feeling safe in reaching out for support is key. And then E in rise is empowerment. And this means empowering your soul, yourself. And soul is spiritual oneness with unconditional love. Empower yourself with love. Tell yourself that you're worthy, you can get up. So next time you're looking on how to shift your mindset from a victim to a heroine, rise, recognize, be intentional, seek support, and empower yourself.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And whatever you said, it's exactly what we need right now, whether the political climate, economic climate, cultural climate, that is exactly what we need right now. So thank you, Ektha, for being on my podcast and giving us tools, but also shifting our perspective on how to see ourselves divorcing from the savior mentality and, frankly, celebrating the little wins in our life. Where can my guests find you? How can they have access to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharon, for having me on here today. I am available to answer any questions, to support in any way that I can. You can find me on my website, www.shakti, I'm also very, very active on Instagram. We're putting out daily tips that you can just pop in, join us, try it. And that's Shakti Therapy. And of course, always an email is welcomed at info@shaktitherapyhealing.com. The one thing that I will leave everyone with is, if you are going to compare yourself to your past. If you are desiring to impress your future self with the actions you take today. And if you want to keep anyone happy, keep your present self happy.
Beautiful. With that, we conclude this episode of the Courage to Identify podcast. You can find Ektha at her social media and website, and even her email that she mentioned. You can find me on SharonAngel.com and follow me on the socials. I have one more episode for you on season 3 of the Courage to Identify podcast. So I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.